You ready? Let's go to Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Once you've got it, stand up with me. Let's read it together while you're standing. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Really quick question. So I've got a friend back home who knows somebody here. Carterville Christian, where are you at? C3, where are you at? Avery Pfeiffer, where are you at? Avery Pfeiffer, where are you at? Hey, Avery, I love your dad a lot, and I just got a text from him that he wanted me to tell you that mommy and daddy miss you so much, and that your chickens are waiting for you. So Avery, your dad loves you, and I hope your chickens miss you too. Stand up. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. So check this. The reason I've got you standing up is because standing up is using our bodies to remind ourselves that when we're listening to the words of Scripture, what's up, man? When we're listening to the words of Scripture, we're hearing the words of God. So it's not like we worship the physical book, but as one of the things that Christians we believe throughout history is that the Scripture is God's message to us. So standing up is using our bodies as a reminder that when you hear me read this, the words that you're hearing are God's message to you. Sound good? Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. Now as they, that's Jesus and his disciples, were traveling along, he, Jesus, entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet, listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all this serving alone? Now if you do care, tell her to get up and help me." But the Lord answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you're worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her." Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for speaking to us. Continue to change us. Amen. Go ahead and have a seat. Do me a favor, tap someone next to you and tell them sit down. Tap your second choice, tell them sit down. Now talk to yourself for a second, tell yourself sit down. The one thing I want you to catch tonight, the one phrase I want you to get tonight is this phrase, sit down. So here's a rhetorical question. How do I get who I want to have? How do I get who I want to have? The answer to that question dictates a lot that we do. For instance, my wife and I, we're coming up on our 6th year anniversary, and our relationship, cool, thanks. Thanks, cool. Our relationship started by me living out my answer to the question, how do I get who I want to have? Can I tell y'all how it happened? So I mentioned earlier, my wife and I both went to this Bible college in Joplin called Ozark Christian College. You should go to Ozark. So we both went to Ozark, and our 3rd year at Ozark together, we were both RAs. RAs are basically people who live in the dorm who looked out for the other people in our dorm. So we were going into our 1st year being RAs, which would have been our junior year. Now, the spring before that, right before we left campus and went home for this summer, they gave us this piece of paper with all of the new RAs and all of our email addresses and phone numbers. I'd never talked to Chelsea before this, so I thought, great, I'm gonna just hit her up. They gave me her number. So I messaged her and I said, "Hey, you don't know me, my name's Jaron, it's my 1st year being an RA as well. What if next year we just got our floors together to hang out and do some stuff?" That's May. Fast forward to August, we go all the way through RA training. The end of RA training happens. Then I say, "Hey, let's go to this coffee shop in Joplin called Joplin Avenue." And I said, "Let's go to Joplin Avenue and let's plan some RA stuff." That was a lie, friends. So we get there at like 4 p.m. and we start talking, and I just make the discussion about her. So tell me about yourself. Tell me about your summer. What all did you do? What do you like? It goes all the way till 8 p.m. when Joplin Avenue closed. So I looked at Chelsea and I said, dang, they closed. We ain't even get to talk about our floors. I guess we got to come back tomorrow. Check this. That was on a Monday. I did the same thing on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So by this time we're going steady because we just had 5 straight coffee dates. So then when the semester actually starts, I'm like, oh, I'm about to go all out. Her birthday was coming up. So I text her and I said, hey, when you get out of class, meet me in front of your dorm. Boys, I wouldn't recommend this, and girls don't do this. I text her and she got in my car and I had this blindfold and I said, put it on. I know it sounds bad. And I was like, pick a direction. North, south, east, and west. And whatever direction she'd pick, I had a date planned so I'd surprise her when we get there. So she said north. I drove her 2.5 hours to Kansas City, which is, girls, driving in a car blindfolded with a dude you just started talking to for 2.5 hours is weird. So I take her north to Kansas City. We go to this museum, do all this stuff. We're going steady. I'm taking her to Applebee's. I'm taking her to McDonald's. I'm taking her to Subway. It's going nuts. So I'm going back to my dorm, telling my dudes, I got her. It worked. She's going back to her dorm, telling her girls about this friend she got. Clearly manipulating coffee dates and blindfolding her was not the way to get her. So then a few weeks later, I actually got the guts and just took her to Subway and asked her to be my girlfriend, and that worked. So, thanks. How do I get who I want to have? Let's take that question from my relationship and bring it to church camp. I'm assuming that all of you are here because that's a question you have in relationship to Jesus. There are at least 4 groups in the room. Some of you came to CIY saying, I'm coming here because I'm going to get Jesus while I'm here. Some of you are here and you're kind of questioning and you're kind of convinced it's been a great week, worship has been good, and so now you're asking, okay, I want him, how do I get him? Some of you aren't there yet, but you're probably in a place to where if there is a God and it is Jesus and this whole thing is true and these people aren't crazy for singing what they sing, if I were to buy into this thing, how do I get him? And then there are others of you who are probably professional church camp goers where you've been to CIY, you've been to camp, you have the high, you have the moment, then you go home and in October you're looking back asking, where'd you go? What happened? So this group, you're asking, how do I have Jesus at home? I'm assuming that you're in one of those 4 spaces in some form or fashion asking the question, how do I get who I want? How do I get Jesus? If that's you, the text I just read you, the whole purpose of that passage is to teach you what it looks like, what it means to get Jesus. So can we explore this text to answer our question, how do we get who we want to have, which is Jesus? Here's the first one. Jesus, he's using these 2 women, Martha and Mary. It's a real life example, but they're pictures. One of them is a picture of how not to get Jesus. One of them is a picture of how we do get Jesus. Let's look at the first picture, the picture of Martha. This is a picture of how we don't get Jesus. Let me read this for you again. Verse 38, now as they were traveling along, he entered a village and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. So Martha said, Jesus, I want you. Come into my house. Come into my life. And look what it says. She had a sister called Mary who was sitting at the Lord's feet listening to him. But check this. Martha was distracted with all her preparation. She was making dinner. She was making drinks. She was cleaning the tables. She was doing a lot of work. And she came up to Jesus and said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all of this alone? Tell her to help me. So here's what's happening. Martha said, Jesus, I want you to come into my house. I want you to come into my life. And here was Martha's number one game plan. Martha said, the way I'm gonna get Jesus is by doing a bunch of stuff for Jesus. I'm gonna invite Jesus to my house, and I'm gonna make him dinner, and I'm gonna get him his favorite drink, and I'm gonna make the table really nice, and I'm gonna clean up. And the whole time he's sitting in my living room, he's chilling, but I'm over here doing a bunch of stuff, doing a bunch of stuff, doing a bunch of stuff. And then she says, Jesus, tell Mary to get on board with me, because this is how we get you in our lives. The way that we get you is by doing a bunch of stuff for you. And do you know what Jesus didn't do? Jesus didn't agree with Martha. Which means Martha is a picture that tells us we can't get Jesus by doing stuff for Jesus. Let me say it another way. Martha is a picture that shows us you cannot earn Jesus. You can't do anything that will make Jesus and win him over into coming into your life. You can't get him by doing stuff for him. It's almost like Jesus is saying, Martha, you trying to get me by doing stuff for me is like chasing bubbles. Have you ever tried to catch bubbles? Or have you ever seen toddlers try to catch bubbles? There's the bubbles floating everywhere, and they're reaching, and they're missing, and they're reaching, and they're missing. And in the odd chance when they do think they actually got it, it pops, and they've done all that work, and at the end of the day, they're still empty-handed. Jesus is saying, those of you who think you can get me by trying to earn me and do a bunch of stuff for me, you look just like a toddler trying to catch a bubble. Or there's another. I've got a friend. He talks about his college days. I'm a preacher. And he says there was one day, he said he was like a free spirit student. He was a go with the flow kind of student, which means he didn't do a lot of homework. And so one day he said his syllabus just opened up, and he said, oh no, I've got a paper due at the end of this week. So he thought, this must be a sign from God. So he says he spends the next 2 days doing hard work on this paper. He was doing some of the best work he'd ever done. He did it early. He said he felt so confident about all the work that he did, he didn't wait until the day that it was due. He took his finished paper, walked to his professor's office, slammed it on his professor's desk, and walked out and said, that's gonna be the best paper you've ever seen, and went back home. So he said a few weeks later, the professor's handing out the papers. He's giving them back to the students that were all graded. And he says his professor gave him the paper, and it was his best paper, and he saw a big fat red F written on the paper. And next to it, the professor said, great work. This was just the wrong assignment. Listen to me. Some of y'all are doing a lot of great work trying to earn Jesus. You're reading your Bible really well, trying to earn Jesus. You're going to church really well, trying to earn Jesus. You're only listening to worship music really well, trying to earn Jesus. Listen to me, great work, that's not what he asked for from you. He never asked you to try to earn him. I look at Martha, and she's a picture of me. Can I show you how I think she's a picture of me? And I think she might be a picture of you in the same way. Here's the first one. Martha got so caught up doing stuff for Jesus that she never actually connected with Jesus. My wife, our kid Theodore, he's 9.5 months years old. Yeah, that makes sense. When my wife first told me that she was pregnant with Theodore, my instinct was I got to do a bunch of stuff to make sure Chelsea and my newborn kid are taken care of. So I was working, and I was working, and I was running, and I was working, and I was doing a bunch of stuff for my wife, and we looked back, and we had gone 6 weeks without having an actual date night and talking to each other. I did so much stuff for her, I never actually ended up connecting with her. So goes our relationships with humans, and that's how you are in your relationship with God. You can get so caught up doing a bunch of stuff for him that you never actually connect with him. That's one way Martha's a picture. Another way Martha's a picture, look at what Jesus said about Martha. Jesus said, Martha, you are anxious and bothered about so many things. You're worried and bothered about so many things. Here's what anxiety is. Here's what that word anxiety or that word worried and bothered that Jesus uses. Martha had made the task her focus. She had prioritized tasks so much that it pulled her into this pit of anxiety. Martha's to-do list was so long that she could never sit down. I've seen this play out in my own life. When I first came to Jesus, I was your age when I first came to Jesus, and the first thing I told myself is, okay, I'm gonna read my Bible, and I'm gonna go to church, and I'm gonna read my Bible 3 more times today, and I'm only gonna listen to K-Love, if it's positive and encouraging, and I'm not gonna listen to certain kind of stuff. My to-do list was so long. And here's the thing, I assumed that having a relationship with God meant carrying my to-do list. So I had this weird guilt behind it, so I couldn't not do the to-do list, because if I wasn't doing the to-do list, then I clearly didn't have a relationship with God. But here's how it works. We get so focused on the task that we never connect with the person. So I'm doing all this stuff for God, never actually felt a connection with God, and then I thought, what the heck is the point of doing all this stuff? And that was matched with guilt, because I didn't want to read my Bible. And it was this circle and this toxic cycle of long to-do lists, not connecting with God. I ended up burning out. I ended up feeling guilty, and I never got Jesus. Here's another way Martha's a picture of me. Martha was doing what was totally normal in her culture. In the culture that they were living in, the expected way to have a relationship for somebody was to do a bunch of stuff for them. Martha was doing what was normal. Here's one of the things I've learned. Trying to earn Jesus feels real normal. I learned it from birth. I wonder where you learned trying to earn Jesus. Did you earn trying to learn Jesus because the culture we're in and we live in is so obsessed with what we do that you feel like if you're not doing the thing, then you're not worth anything, and you've projected that onto your relationship with Jesus, thinking this whole thing is about what I do? I wonder if you learned that you've got to earn Jesus by seeing on social media all of these 15-year-olds who are literally saving, quote unquote, the world, and you're telling yourself, I see it on TikTok. The way to have a relationship with Jesus is to start my own nonprofit. Or here's one. I wonder if you learn to earn your relationship with Jesus because there's an adult in your life, maybe your parent or a loved one, who you feel as if they only give you affirmation and they only care about you and they only give you attention when you're doing the right thing for them. And you've projected that onto Jesus. Or from like the time you were like 3, you've had this deep burden that I just got to be the one to carry all the weight in all of my relationships. I wonder if that's where you learned it. Where'd you learn it? Here's the last way Martha's like me. Jesus says to her, he says to her, Martha, Martha. Here's a little cool Bible nerd thing. When Jesus says things like that, Martha, Martha, that means he's like speaking to her compassionately. So Jesus didn't tell Martha, hey, that's the dumbest thing you're trying to do, fix it. No, Jesus, he's talking to Martha saying, hey, that's not the right way, and it's destroying you. I want to help you. I've experienced the same thing that Martha experienced. I grew up, and my dad wasn't around. He didn't live with us. He and my mom were never married. We weren't close. And growing up, it felt like the only time my dad and I had a relationship is when I was the one reaching out and I was the one making the relationship. So that goes on for most of my life. When I become 16 or 15 and become a Christian, I thought, if that's the way I act with my dad, or I have to be with my dad, that's the way I have to be with God. So like I said, immediately when I become a Christian, I think, here's my to-do list to carry my relationship with God. My to-do list as I got older ended up growing into not just normal Christian stuff I do now. Now I'm going to go into ministry and be a missionary and work for the church. And for years, I have a Bible college degree. I'm on staff at a church. I've spent years doing those things, trying to earn Jesus and never actually connected with him. So my list just got longer, and I added more stuff because I thought at some point something's got to click, and here's where it all ended. It all ended with me in my bed one day, burnt out, curled up in a hole, not wanting to do anything. And I remember I felt, it was almost as if God was saying, hey, just go. There's this conference at Ozark hosts, and it's almost as if God said, just go to the session this evening. Just go to the session this evening. So I went to the session, and my friend Ashley, she was preaching, and she preached this sermon. Her big bullet point for the sermon is, God doesn't want you to try to carry your relationship with him. And immediately I was like, oh no. And it was warm, and it was gentle, and it was God's special way of saying to me, hey, what you've been doing isn't working. I want to show you a better way. And that's what he wants to do for you. He wants to show you a better way to have him. And that's where we're going to switch pictures. Let's go to our second picture. We're going to go to our picture of Mary. Shout the word Mary. Mary. One more word. Shout the word Mary. Mary. Mary is a picture of how to have Jesus. And what Jesus is going to do with Mary is he's going to show us that he completely changed the game and what it means to have a relationship with him. Here's the first one. Jesus changes the game on who can have a relationship with him. Check this, verse 39. It says, she had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet. Mary, so here's Martha in the kitchen doing all the stuff. She's working. Jesus is sitting here teaching. Back in that time when someone was sitting down there probably teaching. And Mary is just crisscross applesauce in front of Jesus. Mary, when she was sitting crisscross applesauce in front of Jesus, that's her saying, I'm going to come and be a disciple. Here's the problem with that whole thing. In that time, women weren't allowed to be disciples in any form or fashion. So Mary, knowing that she wasn't allowed by society to be a disciple of Jesus, said, I'm going to do it anyways. And you know what Jesus didn't do? Jesus didn't say, hey, you're not allowed. Jesus didn't say, don't you know you're not supposed to do that? No, Jesus welcomed her. Jesus said, I don't care that everybody else says you're not the kind of person that comes to me. I don't care that you might think other people expect you not to have life with me. He says, I'm receiving you. Jesus changes the game on who can have him by receiving anybody who wants him. Jesus changed the game on who can have him by receiving everyone or whoever wants him. I wonder if some of you have gotten so used to being in relationships where you felt like you were only accepted if you were presenting a certain image. You've gotten so used that people will only accept me if my Insta looks like this, if my TikTok looks like this, if I look this good going to school, if I have this. They'll only accept me if I'm doing good at basketball. They'll only accept me if I actually get into the college. They'll only accept me if I'm actually doing the thing. And you're projecting that onto Jesus. Listen, that's not the vibe that Jesus is giving here. Jesus is giving the kind of vibe that says, who you are, what you've done, and what you haven't done is not a barrier to you having a relationship with me. Jesus says, I'm accepting you. Push it a little bit further. Some of you have been living in relationships for a very long time with this thing called imposter syndrome. You ever heard of imposter syndrome? That's when you feel like a fraud. And you tell yourself, if they actually see certain parts of me, if they know the truth about me, they're going to absolutely reject me. So I'm just going to try my hardest to not show them that and cover that up. And I'm walking on eggshells in all of my relationships. I can't tell them that. They can't see this. I don't want them to see that. I hope they don't find this out. Listen to me, listen to me. Jesus sees it all. Jesus knows it all. And Jesus says, I'm still embracing you. I'm still welcoming you. I hope this is valid enough for you. I'm 31. I've been walking with Jesus since I was 16, so it's been almost 15 years. I hope this is valid for you. Earlier this year, I had this really deep sense that, oh no, Jesus sees it all. Like he sees everything about me. And then I had this weird conversation with myself where I thought, Jaron, why are you not scared? Why aren't you freaked out that this dude sees everything about you? And then I said to myself, in 15 years with him, he's never given me any reason to believe that he would condemn me. He's only embraced me. Listen, friends, he's not condemning you. He's saying, come on, I'm embracing you. Do any of y'all have AP courses in your school? AP courses? Okay, I'm gonna use two different illustrations then. Listen, those of you who do have AP courses, here's how an AP course works. I was in AP English in high school. An AP course meant I had to get a certain grade or pass a certain test before I could come into the class. Jesus does not operate like that. Jesus is not saying you've got to get to a certain place before you can have me. Or have any of you ever tried to ride like a roller coaster at an amusement park where they had the little thing that says you got to be this tall to get on this ride? Jesus doesn't have this standard where he says, you got to live up to this before you can have me. Jesus says, I see where you are, I see who you are, and you can have me right now. So Jesus, he changes the relationship on who can have him. Here's the second one. Jesus changes the relationship on how can have him, how we can have him. Check this, check verse 42. Jesus talking about Mary. He says, only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. So check this. Mary is sitting down, not doing nothing, just listening to Jesus and receiving from Jesus. The rest of the world, the normal thing to do was you got to cook for him, you got to clean for him, you got to make sure he's comfortable. Mary just sat down and received from him, and Jesus says, that's the good thing. That's what I want. That's how you have a relationship with me. Jesus, he changes the game on how to have him by moving us from doing stuff for him to receiving from him. He says, here's the new game. You have me not by doing stuff for me. You have me by receiving from me. Can I tell y'all about my baby boy, Theodore? He's 9.5 months. Here's something I've learned in 9.5 months. If I were to define Theodore and I's relationship, it's this. I cook for him. I feed him. I change him. I put him to sleep. I carry him. I give him milk. I give him snacks. I take him to school. I talk to him. I change his diapers. And do you know what he does? He just sits there and takes it. He just, whatever you want, Dad. I'm totally dependent on you. I can only receive from you. The child's way of relating to a parent is only by receiving from them. One of my favorite things Jesus said, Jesus says this multiple times. If you want relationship with me, you must become like a child. What does that mean? That means I receive from him. He doesn't want you to try to earn him. He doesn't want you to try to show him all you can do. He says, just be a kid and receive from me. Here's a cool thing. Here's a cool thing about this. Here's a cool thing about this. This scripture is right after a story called the Good Samaritan. So Jesus tells a story about a Good Samaritan who's one of like the super Christian looking people who does the really good thing. And that story ends by Jesus saying, just go do what the Good Samaritan does. And the story ends. So I think the way the book of Luke is written is when Jesus says, go be the Good Samaritan who does this good thing, we're supposed to ask, how the heck am I supposed to do that? And then the very next story is of Jesus pointing at Mary and says, I want you to sit down and receive. I think what Jesus is saying is the way to do the big thing, the way to do the stuff is by first receiving from me. Because as you receive from me, I change you and grow you into the kind of person who can do this stuff. Let me go back to Theodore. I'm feeding Theodore now. I'm clothing Theodore now. I'm changing Theodore now. All of that is going to help him to grow up into a person who can walk on his own. It's when we receive from Jesus that we're able to grow and do the stuff for Jesus, which tells me I can't do good to get Jesus. No, it's only when I get Jesus and receive from Jesus that I'm able to do good. Which tells me one more thing. If I were the devil, there's a woman named Corrie ten Boom who said this. I don't know if I'd be trying to make you bad. I'd probably spend all of my time making you busy. Because if I can make you busy, then you never receive from Jesus. And if you never receive from Jesus, you're never changed by Jesus. And if you're never changed by Jesus, you end up being a terrible person. Oh, friends, don't you think that the devil's creeping around your door just trying to get you to do the bad stuff? He's saying, I want you to add task and task and task and run and be anxious so you never get Jesus. Ding, ding, ding. Do you see how Jesus changes the game? He changes the game on who can have him by saying, I'm receiving whoever. And then he changes the game on how to have him by saying, just receive from me. So how do I win the game? How do I get Jesus? Shout this phrase, sit down. Sit down. One more time, shout the phrase, sit down. Sit down. One more time like you mean it, sit down. Sit down. Sit down and receive from him. The way to have Jesus is by sitting down and receiving from him. The morning sessions, Chad Ragsdale, he's going to be walking you, and I think he's already started walking you through Psalm 23. Have you ever read Psalm 23 and seen the relationship between the shepherd and the sheep? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He's the one that makes me lie down. He's the one that puts me next to green pastures. He's the one that takes me next to still waters. He's the one that restores my soul. He's the one that prepares a table for me. He's the one that anoints my head with oil. It's his goodness, it's his mercy that follows me. The whole shepherd-sheep relationship is the shepherd giving to the sheep and the sheep receiving from the shepherd. Listen, Jesus is a good shepherd who wants way more for you than he wants from you. So what do? Sit down and receive from him. I'm done. Can I tell you a few ways, a few things that I've seen Jesus give to people? Here's one. I've seen Jesus give people a sense of identity. I've seen Jesus give people a sense of self. I'd be the first example I could think of. For most of my life, the narrative that I had in my head was, if I do enough good stuff, then I have a sense of self. If I'm doing good at basketball, if I'm doing good at preaching, whatever I'm doing, once I do good, then I feel like a person. That's one of the most exhausting ways to live in the world. Because that means if I'm doing good, then I feel worth it. If I'm doing bad, then I feel like I'm not worth my salt. And so I got to constantly be doing good. And there was one day where it was this weird, I was in therapy because I developed anxiety for it, and it was really bad. And I felt just Jesus just saying, I'm giving you a free identity. Just receive it and rest. So he gives identity. Here's another one. He gives family. There's a man in my church, his name's Nick. Literally, like, some dude in my church found Nick on the side of the road walking from California. It was this really weird thing. So man brings Nick to church. Nick starts coming to church for a few weeks. Then Nick walks up one day and was like, can I get baptized? I believe in Jesus now. Was like, sure, let's do it. So like we make this impromptu baptism for Nick. We fill the baptismal up. And Nick's sitting there next to me. And we do the thing, we baptize him. He comes up and he looks and people are clapping and he whispers over to me. He says, why are there so many people here for me? He said, I've never had this many people come to my birthday party. I actually don't know if I've ever had a birthday party. He was 42. And I said, I was about to say, boy, welcome to the family. I was about to hit him with that, pastor, God gave you a family. Before I could open my mouth, this crowd of people runs up to Nick, hugs him, and they say, welcome to the family, Nick. Jesus gave that man a family. Jesus is also giving people guidance. Here's my story again. Eric joked earlier and asked what I was like after high school. My first few years with Jesus were a hot mess. It was not a good thing. So I was back at home after my first year of college, not able to go back. And I remember driving around my hometown one day thinking, well, Jesus, I've ruined it. What do you got? I guess you can take the wheel now. No joke. This literally happened. Like 5 minutes later, one of my friends who went to Ozark randomly texted me and said, dude, you should just come to Ozark. And I was like, God? So I took it, I was like, I'm just gonna assume that was you, Jesus. It was at Ozark that my life with Jesus ended up getting changed. It was at Ozark that I ended up meeting my wife. It was at Ozark that I ended up having the church. Jesus, he gave me guidance in that moment. And here's the last one. I've seen Jesus give people strength. I've seen Jesus give people strength. A few years ago, I was preaching at something like this, and this kid came up to me, and he was like, I want to tell you my story. And I was like, let me hear it. And he said, a few years ago, I first started coming to youth group, and he said, within a few weeks of me coming to youth group, my parents divorced. And he said, that was the lowest moment of my life. He said, I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to think about Jesus. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go to school. He said, I just wanted to sit there in the dark. And then he said, but here's what happened. The youth group that I started going to came, and they encouraged me, and they prayed for me, and they kept checking on me, and they literally carried me all the way through that season. Jesus gave him strength through that youth group. Here's what I'm saying. I don't know what you need. You might know what you need. You might not know what you need. Jesus knows what you need, and he can and he will give you all that you need. So shout this phrase, sit down. Sit down. He'll give you the most important thing. My first year at Ozark, after my first year at Ozark, I was gonna go to Albania for this mission trip, and I needed to raise like a couple $1,000s. And so I spent like months hustling, working to try to get the money. I'm trying to mow lawns, I'm trying to do all kinds of stuff, I'm trying to email a bunch of people. And after like 3 months, I ended up having like $12. So it was like, I guess this thing ain't gonna work out. So then one of our assistant basketball coaches at Ozark, I went to bed on a Friday. On a Saturday morning, he texted me and he said, hey, Jaron, I've got the check with the full amount for you, with your name on it. All you got to do is come and receive it. He freely gave me everything I'd been working for. Jaron, what's the point of this sermon? Listen to me. I'm saying you don't have to work to try to get a relationship with Jesus because he's freely giving himself to you. He's saying just come and receive from me. If I could be overly simplistic on what the Bible story is, the Old Testament, overly simplistic, is a bunch of people trying and failing to earn God. The New Testament is God freely giving himself to you. He freely gave himself to you when he became a human and somehow stayed God. He freely gave himself for you when he hung on a cross. He freely gave himself to you when he rose from the dead, sent his spirit to sit down in your heart, and he's still giving, so sit down and receive. Do you need Jesus? He says, sit down and receive me. Do you need rest? He says, sit down and receive me. Do you need family? He says, sit down and receive it from me. Do you need joy? He says, sit down and receive it from me. Do you need strength? He says, sit down and receive it from me. Do you need hope for tomorrow? He says, sit down and receive it from me. Do you need a sense of identity? He says, sit down and receive it from me. He says, I am and I have all that you need. Just sit down and receive it. So here's our question. How do I get who I want to have? He says, just sit down. You don't got to try to earn me.
You don't have to run around like Martha trying to do a bunch of stuff for me. I'm already here. I'm freely giving myself to you. Just sit down. Jesus, we thank you. Thank you for offering yourself to us freely. I ask that even now, you give us a sense of your invitation to receive from you. Persuade our hearts that you're offering yourself to us. And that you are our shepherd who has all that we need. It's when we receive from you, just sit down, that we have all that we need. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for accepting us. Thank you for being good to us.